Well, I'm really hoping that he's the first of many best-selling authors to appear on the Brenton on Tour podcast. But if he's the only one, he's a hell of a one. My friend Aaron Chapman joins me this week to talk about his brand new book, Vancouver After Dark, which is the fourth in a series about Vancouver, following up Liquor, Lust, and the Law, Live at the Commodore, and his book on the Penthouse. We're going to dive into the music scene in Vancouver, past, present, and potentially future. Some, a few little stories that we collectively share from across the country, and a lot more. So anxious for you guys to learn something. You're going to learn about Vancouver, the city that I call home for the last 15 years. I can't wait for you to hear it. Thanks to Varia Brewing for giving you some product. I'm going to give you some product, for listening, sharing, and liking. So keep doing that. I'm going to pick one of you. Aaron has given me a brand new copy of his book, Vancouver After Dark. He's going to sign it. He's going to give it to you. So we're going to throw that into the mix as well. It's a great read. You can hear this on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Huge thanks to my buddy Dean Blundell over at deanblundell.com for hosting me over there, and for Todd Hancock and the Todd Hancock podcast, which is the Toddcast podcast, for presenting this for you. So away we go. Aaron Chapman, Vancouver After Dark.
Let's rock today. Out on stage, I get to bring all of these people together for 3 hours.
You're listening to the Brenton on Tour Music Cast, brought to you by people who love music, people who make music, and all things, well, music. You still don't really know who he is, but he just helped you stop drinking shitty coffee on the Coffee Cast. So, get off to John, grab a ghetto blaster, hit record and play at the same time, and learn a thing or two about music. It's the Brenton on Tour Music Cast. Here's BD.
Hey friends, live from Vancouver. Hanging out with my great friend Aaron Chapman. How you doing, sir?
I'm good, Brenton. Great to be with you on this.
Well, this is the Music Cast. It's episode 3.
Yes.
I know so many people in this city since I've moved here 15 years ago, but none more informed than yourself.
Oh my gosh! Now.
So here we are. We are gathered in the new palace that you're living in.
Yes.
Which the last time
high above the center of the earth.
The last time we were together, we were driving Nikki Sixx around town.
That was a wild day because Motley Crue was in town.
They were in beautiful Abbotsford, BC.
They're playing in Abbotsford, outside the city. For those who are not familiar with the geography,
the great Chad guy was there.
That's right.
That's right.
And Nikki has become a shutterbug, if you will, taking pictures, and he's actually a pretty good photographer.
Got that whole book going.
And I guess after so many years of going nuts on the road and consuming anything that was in front of him, he's basically clean and sober now, and he's going and now that's his hobby, and it's a chance to get out of the arena and go see, the local sites. By as best I could tell, he does this in every town.
Well, he said that we went out. I got the call from our mutual great friend Chad guy.
Yes.
And he's like, "Listen, we got it. Nikki wants to go downtown.
Yeah.
He's got the book coming out. He wants to film. He wants to take some pictures. The whole thing. We're gonna, you got to go down." And I'm like, "I can't do this without the greatest historian.
Oh my God.
In the city. I got to bring Chappie with me." And everyone was on board, including Nikki. And he's like, "This is great." So,
he needed a chaperone through the downtown east side.
Absolutely. And,
of the city.
One hell of a tour we gave him.
And it was fascinating because he, he's basically dressed as Nikki Sixx. You can recognize him. It's not as though he's in a suit and tie and things like that, or he's got a baseball cap and sunglasses. As we were walking, as you might remember this too, and it makes me laugh.
Hard to forget.
People would walk by and go, "That's Nikki Sixx," right in Hastings, in the toughest or sort of dirtiest, sort of
the greatest line from that day was we went into, so for our friends listening abroad,
yes,
because this is a big deal, Chappie. This podcast, it was like number 3 in Norway.
That's amazing.
For a week and 2 days.
Yeah.
It was pretty rocking.
Norway's great.
We are worldly. It's doing well, which is why, I brought you on to boost the ratings.
Yes.
And, Arsenal Press paid very good money to have you on here. So it's very good. We walked around. Nikki wanted to take some pictures.
Yes.
And he was very, very generous. He sent me into the local branch of a bank with some money and said, come back out with a bunch of
5s and 10s.
5s, 10s, 20s, whatever. would walk around and ask people about their story, ask to take their picture, and paid them money.
Yeah.
And it was really, really.
But he did it
really
in a very
nice
kind of,
him.
I thought in a very, very sort of kind. He would ask people, "Hey, do you mind if I?" And he would say, "Can I give you a couple bucks for some smokes or something like that, or help you out, or like." So I found that very sort of very humane the way he was doing it, or very sort of professionally, and nobody felt like they were selling themselves for one of his photos.
No, and I think everyone
he
had
did
a
it
story
in a very
to tell.
friendly way. But the funny thing was, as soon as people in the downtown east side found out that Nikki Sixx was handing out $5 bills to everybody in town, there was basically a parade following us at one point.
Pied Piper.
And we had to take, like the Pac-Man, you take a couple of quick turns and go around and get out of the, to throw the ghosts off.
We went. There's a
Yes.
place in Vancouver called Insight,
Yes.
where they help people that need help.
Harm
with-
reduction, safe injection site. Yes.
So Nikki went in there.
Wanted to check it out.
He went in and checked it out, and I'll never forget the line. We walk in, everyone just stops what they're doing, and some dude pokes out around the corner,
Yeah.
goes back around and goes, "Nikki Sixx, man, my dad fucking hated you, man. You were the devil in my house. Rock on, man. Want to get high?" And I was like, Nikki just kind of looked at both of us.
He kind of didn't know anything.
Then his security guard looked at both of us.
That's right. There was his buddy, the security guy, with him. Yeah.
And we knew, it was showtime.
Yeah.
So
the four of us just kind of stepped away from it. Yeah. And the guy at Inside, I remember, who knew me from somewhere. I can't remember. It said, "If you can come back, we're just a little busy right now." Because Nikki just wanted to see this.
he just walked right in.
Yeah, just walked right in. So that was a really interesting day, and I saw some of the photos he took later on his, maybe it was his website or his Instagram or something like that. They were really actually very good.
Yeah,
And,
I think he followed it up with a book
Yeah,
to go with the Heroin Diaries. Plus, he had some other stuff.
just
So,
one of the wild things on tour that sometimes
One-
people
that happens in Vancouver.
happens here, it happens,
It happens in
happened to us,
Vancouver.
yeah.
And I was happy to have you along for that journey.
that was great. I
because-
really enjoyed that, and it's funny because right where we are right now, which is inside my place.
Which
At
is
the
in
end of the day-
beautiful. Hold on,
Yeah.
to describe it to our listeners.
Yes.
So, Chappie's currently in a robe. He's
I am.
literally
I'm in a Hugh
like
Hefner,
he's
state.
he's in a Hugh Hefner state. This is what happens when you write books and people pay you big money. To he's in demand. He's been on global TV, friends, this week.
That's right.
And so this is funny. We got another story about global TV.
Hmm.
So that was going on. And then, so now we're in the beautiful confines. Like there's West Van and then there's where Aaron lives. And he's in a giant building overlooking the whole city. Not quite the penthouse suite. It's like
No.
the second floor down from it.
Right.
But I mean, he couldn't quite
We're right.
afford
We
it.
could see BC Place, the arena. We're just
see-
basically out around my front door here. So
That's
we're
right.
right in the heart of the city.
We can
here,
also
but,
see Insight.
Yes. Yeah, we can. It's right on the border. That's the thing. That's what I like about it. If I walk up my place and I look to my right, I'll see like the Yaletown aerobics wives running by with their designer dogs. And if I look to my left, I'll see a guy with a shopping cart, with a bunch of scrap metal. So I really feel like I'm in the border of heaven and hell right down here.
So we do this Nikki Sixx thing, and we
Yes.
we travel.
We gotta
back.
finish the Nikki story here.
Well, no, we try. It kind of leads into this thing.
Yes.
So we say goodbye. You go about your day. I drive back to Abbotsford.
And to interject, Nikki and I took a photo together
Mhm.
just at the end, just as kind of a souvenir. Thanks, Nick. He was real. I enjoyed my day with him. He was a real gentleman. But I walked inside my place, and my neighbors who were like heading out the front door with their baby carriage was like, "Was that just who I thought?" Like,
was that Aaron Chapman?
what, no, like, what is it you do for a living, Aaron? Exactly. Like, can I say I don't know? That's a good question sometimes.
We drive back, and Nikki says to me, "What's your favorite Motley Crue record?" And I said, "Oh, sorry. Coincidentally, Motley Crue announced that they're coming out of retirement today."
That's it. This is also topical.
This is
because of
this
this, yeah.
topical. This is funny that it's happening today,
Yeah.
but that's a whole other thing. We got back. He says, "What's your favorite Motley Crue record?" I said, "Too Fast for Love" for me. One of the first albums I ever bought was that when I was in my ute there,
Yeah.
and I said, "I think it's like it's a punk rock record," and he agreed. He's like,
Yeah.
"I think it's a super punk rock record, and it's amazing." And he says, "What do you know about Prince?" And I said, "Well, huge fan over the years."
Mm-hmm.
And he proceeds to tell this story about he used to date Prince's ex, I want to say Vanity.
Vanity. Yes, I remember Vanity. Yeah.
And she would tell this story about how Prince would just sit at a piano and hit one key for 4 hours, and then get on the phone and call the band and say, "Get to the studio." And they would get to the studio, and I don't know, 5 a.m.
Yeah.
And record for probably 14 and a half hours and lay down some just crazy shit. And Nikki was like, "This is like some of the best shit you'll never hear."
Right.
And then
it's in the vaults.
That's in the vault. And then recently it's come out that there's, tons of music in the vault, and they want to put it out and all the rest of it. So that coincides with the Prince thing, because then when Prince passed, I had done the last 4 shows for Prince in Vancouver.
That's right. Yeah.
And you had called and said, "Hey, we got people looking for Prince stories. What do you got?" And Squire, your buddy Squire,
my friend Squire from Global TV, and I said, "Well, my buddy Brent did help produce those shows." So
it was crazy. And then we get on Global TV
in the morning.
Patrick,
that's right. Yeah,
you and Patrick, and I'm sitting here with you two music animals, and I'm just like, yeah, it was fun. I did 4 shows with Prince, and then Patrick starts rhyming off every Prince.
Yes, he had seen a bunch.
Every Prince appearance in the city.
Yeah.
For the last 20 years, and it was amazing. So, anyways, friends, I felt it appropriate as we move into the second or the third episode of the Music Cast that I bring one of my most musically educated friends.
Oh gosh, I'm
longest serving member of one of the longest serving members of one of the greatest cover bands alive, with Pepper Sprayed by Hookers, and an author.
Yes,
and historian. And is there anything else?
Out.
Is there anything else that you haven't done, or that you can tell people you do?
Well, I've lately done a bunch of voiceover stuff on cartoons, on these Japanese and Korean cartoons that are being dubbed in English. I always get the bad guy part because my voice is deeper. And
let's hear a sample of a. You're doing it in Korean or English?
No, I'm doing it in English. You see a Korean guy or a Japanese guy on the cartoon, but it's my voice,
right?
And or sometimes it's a robot. There's a show called Tobots that you can find on YouTube, and I play Tobot X, and it's a sort of a Transformers type show.
Okay.
And then there is, there's a bunch of other ones that I've done, and they haven't come out yet. But that's been a sideline. I don't know what in other cities of the world necessarily that musicians sometimes find them branching off and others. I was like a touring musician for 20 years. And, in the Real Mackenzies, and then later with Town Pants, Bocephus King, Hard Rock Miners, some Vancouver sort of Western Canadian bands that people may or may not know. Real Mackenzies people know because they toured all over the world.
No one knows anything past Alberta.
But yeah, that's probably it. That's probably it. But there's some people know these bands because they've been around.
Mackenzies, of course.
Mackenzies, of course.
Town Pants.
Yeah. And so I did that, but around 2012, I wanted to kind of get off the road. I was touring 6, 7, 8 months of the year, and it was kind of wearing down on me, and I wasn't enjoying as much as I used to. But I also I didn't feel like you're supposed to sort of get better as you play, and I was having some nights I just wasn't feeling it, or I felt like I wasn't playing well enough, or there was some kind of diminishing return happening there, and I felt like I kind of needed to just sort of get off the road for a year. When a book deal kind of landed in my lap, because I'd always done some writing on the side, and that led into a book about the Penthouse nightclub in Vancouver, which is it's a strip bar in Vancouver, but it's run by this crazy Italian family, amazing family called the Filipponi family, who have sometimes been miscast in the city as the Sopranos of Vancouver, just because they're Italian and they run a strip bar. But the story is much interesting and much more deeper there. And I thought, even if you lived in New York or San Francisco or Timbuktu, you would find the story really interesting. And I tried to write it as an interesting story and with a bit of zip to it, and it did well. It became a bestseller in Canada technically, even though it was mostly sold out here out west. So that kind of suddenly opened up this writing sort of career for me out of nowhere.
And a voiceover career. Did you put them on book? Did you put them on audio as well?
Well,
that's a lot of words.
The last book I did, which was a true crime story called The Last Gang in Town, has been made into an audio book, but I didn't get to do the voiceover for it. I told them I could do it. By the time we signed the contract and I let them know that, hey, I can do this, they had given it to one of their stable of voiceover actors, and he did a good job, but I would have liked to have done it myself.
Fun if you could have done it in your.
But that just got optioned for a TV series.
The Last Gang.
Last Gang in Town. So I'm hoping, maybe you'll see it. Who knows these things? Because they're a bit of a, it all depends on finding a broadcaster who's into it and things like this. But they're shopping it around now, so who knows what'll happen. So, but I met you in the trenches of concert production, which I sort of had got into just before I was I was still playing a lot, and that's still happening. So there's an old phrase. I saw an old photo of Mickey Rourke. And he's down by the YMCA pool
in Vancouver.
No, he's in New York.
Oh, he's in New York.
And it was, I think it was on his Instagram, and his caption was, "You got to learn to swim in this town." And that made me laugh, but it made me think everybody's got it. Everybody has little sort of sidelines they do, and sometimes one takes off, or one subsides, or one gets going, and then and I think that in this day and age, I think a lot of people are sort of doing that. I always wanted to be a guy that did lots of things. That was always an idea that and I was very inspired by, in a weird way, some of the Monty Python guys. They had been writers and actors and directors, and they always did sort of interesting things. Or they're involved in theater. They did stand-up. And I always thought that was an interesting sort of life to have.
You do have a bit of a John Cleese thing going on.
Maybe
with the robe right now.
I don't have the Basil Fawlty mustache.
No, it is Movember. But
yeah.
Ginger like me.
But yeah, exactly. But, although my dad said that we were related to Graham Chapman from Monty Python. He was a cousin. I don't know if he's passed now, so I don't know if he's both Graham and my father. But I always thought Yellowbeard. Yeah, I always thought, I didn't get a chance to ask him about that. Anyway, so I've now have this sort of odd status in Vancouver, especially because as some of the older historians in the city and some of the people that used to write on that, like people like Chuck Davis and this and that, they passed on. So there's a bunch of us actually, and I'm probably one of a few that are kind of writing about Vancouver in maybe a way that people haven't seen before, or looking at the underbelly of Vancouver in that sense, because there's lots of stories about the logging, companies and the train that moved out from the east to connect Vancouver to the rest of the country and but like for me, some of the bars and the nightclubs and that's where the real Vancouverites always met.
How many people wrote other than Motley Crue about the Marlborough Arch?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So the Marble Arch was the first place in Vancouver I ever had a drink, and I was underage, and I don't know how the hell I got in because I was baby-faced, and did not look old enough at all to be in there with three
Your
other.
Money was good there.
Three of my other buddies, but I thought I can't order like a beer or something like that. I got to something like older, and I ordered Jameson's Irish whiskey.
There you go.
Just give me a shot of Irish whiskey, and my voice had dropped from a fairly boyish soprano when I was 15 to basically what it is now. So I had this sort of older, sort of bigger voice, even though I was a little pipsqueak. I hadn't really grown yet. So the guy probably looked at me and thought, geez, some midget just ordered an Irish whiskey. Okay, we'll give it to him, And I remember drinking it for the first time, and God, it felt like gasoline going down. But I learned to like it. You see, so that's...
Were you wearing this robe?
I was not wearing this. I walked in off the street wearing a robe in the Marble Arch. They might have just thought, he's a wealthy Texas billionaire and he's nuts, so just serve him.
He's just coming off Hastings.
Yeah, that's true.
Good to go. But so I'm 15 years in Vancouver.
Yes. And I met you about in the fall of 2006.
Yeah, so we've basically been, we've been mates for 14 years now at least, and
God,
it's been awesome. We've played 10 gigs together.
That's right,
including my wedding. Which was the biggest gig of all. For those who don't know, there's a wonderful band called Pepper Sprayed by Hookers, made up of gentlemen like ourselves that are in the business. We've got
more merch and music.
Yeah, we got more merch and music. We got 4 drummers, 46 guitar players.
It's a roving cast of characters.
Yeah. And but it's a Christmas miracle, as we refer to it as we play once every 9 years.
Yeah, at this rate now. Yeah, it used to be every year, but now we got to assemble the troops again on that one. That would be
we've known each other for a long time, and I've had to. One of the best things about moving here is that there's not. There's a great history in Vancouver. When you come from Toronto, which is where I came from, there's it's funny because the divide in this country, a lot of people make up over hockey, or they make it up over Alberta and BC are their own thing, and then Quebec's its own thing, and Ontario its own thing. It's really interesting to watch from the east side of it to move to the west, because when I first moved here, there was a lot of sort of East versus West.
Let's
And
all
I-
hate Toronto.
Yeah,
stuff.
and I
Yeah.
I basically realized that it came down to the Canucks not getting on Hockey Night in Canada. And
that you're not wrong on that.
you know what I mean? And that was a big thing, and that was a huge thing. And then the music scene, which I want to say was cordial, but the Queen Street in Toronto had its thing. And then you guys had this reputation for this killer bar scene in Vancouver, Richards and the Starfish Room and all these, the Commodore when it reopened and all
Town
that
Pump and
stuff,
especially
Town
for those
Pump.
Toronto bands. Yeah,
Right. And that was a huge thing. And I cut my teeth in Ontario as a promoter when I was young. And I use that term loosely, but I had money and I was doing I Mother Earth and Our Lady Peace and Tea Party shows for colleges and all this stuff back in, late 90s.
Yeah.
Todd, Age of Electric and all these West bands were coming, Limb Lifter and Zucker Baby and all these bands that we were kind of doing shows with. And I would get these stories about Vancouver and I couldn't wait to get out. So I tour managed, and all the people that I met when I first started tour managing were, House of Blues, Live Nation guys.
Yeah.
Well, that became Live Nation, but we all, they're all out here doing it.
Yeah.
And in this amazing
lots
band-
of people, ex people from certain bands.
Totally.
As well. And yeah, you're right.
And there
yeah.
was this sort of like the bands, like we kept hearing about the West and the East, and then the West would ask us about the bands in the East and what's going on Queen Street and all these.
It's funny you
different
say
things.
that, because from my perspective, being a Westerner and watching the Eastern bands come out, it always seemed to be there was lots of Toronto bands that I loved. I thought they were so great, and they would come out here, and it was kind of like a big deal that they were coming all the way out to Vancouver to play. And it's a hell of a ways to go, especially it felt maybe further away in the 80s and late 80s and 90s, like I was talking to Hugh Dillon from the Headstones about this.
Yeah.
And he was talking about that very thing that it seemed, it was a great distance to go, but we all wanted to go out there.
You can't get your gold record.
Yeah. And it was kind of the promised land. They felt there was kind of like a West Coast sound, and there was already something happening. So it was an interesting time in that late 80s, early 90s for some of the music that was bouncing back and forth from either coast, and the infrastructure that kind of let that happen.
There was, I think there was three distinct sounds because you had the East Coast with Sloan and Thrush Hermit and all these kind of bands that were
Hardship Post.
Yeah,
I remember. Yeah,
all those bands that were there, and then you moved into Toronto.
Yeah.
And you had that whole scene that was going on,
and lots of different things going on within
so
Toronto, 'cause
many
you got
different
everything
bands.
from the Shuffle Demons,
Yeah.
to straight rock bands, and everything in between.
Then you had the rise of that scene in Toronto that kind of blew up, and I think the whole country was rising at the same time. And then the West had all these amazing bands coming out of it, and it just all happened. And people can say what they want about Canadian content, or CanCon as it's referred to, but it really blew up, man, from like 1991, 92 on.
Yeah, and there was a real infrastructure that I think, and at the time I remember sort of saying, about Much Music, turn off this Madonna stuff or whatever. But in hindsight, it was actually pretty good, because you would get, for instance, the Canada concert listings.
Yeah.
They would play those. So I had heard of places like the Misty Moon in Halifax, or, Lee's Palace in Toronto well before I ever went there, because as a teenager, I was always hearing about them. So when I finally got out there to play,
a big deal.
It was a huge, it felt like a bigger deal, and that's probably funny. It's because some of it's just in your mind's eye, but there was a real network there. And I don't know necessarily if you're in a band coming up today, you would have that same sense of the country as people that were in the scene back then had. It's interesting.
And I think, touching on where I want to go down the road eventually with you in a panel down the street or down the road, but the lack of venues the venues that are closing, or historic venues like Richards is gone, the Town Pump is gone,
sure,
the Starfish Room is gone. These are all venues that we heard about in the East. You've got the Commodore still.
Yeah. Where
else are we going?
Well, it's funny because
you got the Vogue.
In my new book, which is called Vancouver After Dark, available in stores across Canada, I talk with Matthew Good about that, and he makes the point. There was a venue in Gastown that was around for the better part of 30 years called the Town Pump, and it was the real, as Matt says, it was the real hub. It was at that time, because you either played that room on the way up or the way down, and when it closed, it really felt like it closed kind of prematurely in a way. The music scene was changing, but he made the point that would Toronto let the Horseshoe close? Because that's kind of what happened in Vancouver. The Town Pump was sort of our Horseshoe, a tavern, in that sense, and it kind of that really sort of we lost a wheel there for a little bit, because within that same period of time here in Vancouver, the Commodore closed for 3 years. It reopens in 1999, but it's right in that window between 1996 and 99. Town Pump changes to a DJ room. Some other clubs, some smaller clubs closed. So it was a real sort of
Where were the
shift.
bands? Where were the bands playing then? When the Town Pump closed, what's left? You got Richards. Richards was open.
Richards started to pick up Richards started to pick up the slack. The Starfish Room, which lasted until about 2002, 2003, I think, that kind of became a place. But it was the scene was changing as well. And you're just a few years away from the beginning of, or some, all of a sudden Napster and some of those things and file sharing sort of hits right around that. So it's been a really sort of fascinating time to watch how the music industry has changed. Let's say from the early 1990s, you could even go before and talk about something, but early 1990s up until today, because some of the same language and some of the same metrics don't necessarily apply anymore. There's a whole other things. And I always say to people, it's never been as hard. And it's also never been as easy at the same time. There's many things that are easier to kind of get yourself heard, or whatnot. But some of the old circuitry that made things happen isn't around anymore. So some people, I don't know where that goes or how that.
Geographically then, so I still feel like with only being out here 15 years, that's a long time, but it's a long time, but it's I feel like I kind of caught the tail end of something. And now it's a new Vancouver.
Yeah.
Like really, honestly, after the Olympics, it's a different city. To me, from a standpoint of like the growth and what's happened here, from even like the refurbishment of BC Place to just the 10 condos, in that neighborhood and what's the place where the casino was.
The
Plaza of Nations.
The Plaza of Nations, yes. So, totally changed.
So for the listeners listening, they're regionally, I wanted, Aaron, break down sort of like, was it an easy city was there a scene amongst the scenes? You got Granville Street, so every city's got their street, right? So you got Granville Street as far as Vancouver nightlife goes, which you wrote about in your book, in the Commodore and all this stuff, which we'll touch on. But like geographically, for people that have never been to Vancouver, Starfish Room, Richards, Commodore, what was were people hopping? What was the scene? How are you getting to go see bands? Was it easy? Because it's way different now.
It's way different now. Well, it's interesting because Vancouver, of course, if you don't know where Vancouver is, it's right 3 hours north of Seattle. We're up in the sort of the northwest sort of corner of North America there. And
best weather in the country.
and Vancouver was always sort of really well placed because people, you could just look at tour schedules. There's so many tours, as you know, that begin or end in Vancouver. Because, even going back to the vaudeville days, when the Marx Brothers came to do a live show at the Orpheum Theater, sometimes they would start in Vancouver, they'd do a week in town, and then they would head down to Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and by the time they got to what was obviously a bigger population center in Los Angeles, the act was ready, everybody was tight, and they were kind of ready to take on, So Vancouver was sort of blessed, and still is, because so many acts sort of start here, and there's lots of, throughout the 50s and 1960s and the 70s, it started to change in the 70s a little bit, but throughout those years, there's a lot of shows that played Vancouver that didn't necessarily go to Calgary or Edmonton or Saskatoon, Regina, in and down the line.
They'd just come up and out.
They would just come up and out. They'd hit, obviously Montreal, Toronto, probably Ottawa, like when they came up the East Coast again, but Vancouver was really sort of unique that way. So we got lots of entertainment here. We were quite frankly spoiled, I think, for some of the shows. So audiences in Vancouver sort of notoriously arms folded, chin up, all right, impress me. The things that still see that today in some stadium shows I've seen, where people are kind of a little bit more reserved than maybe they need to be or something. But
in Vancouver,
well,
no one's from here. I'm
here. Yeah, that's what I'm one of the rare ones. Yeah,
you're one of the rare ones. Robbie and Pete.
But yeah, I think I think there's something to that originally. So everybody in Vancouver, and I'm sure as I say in the book, cities aren't meant to be museums. They're going to change. Businesses are going to change. The taste in music shift. So that suddenly means, one place that was great for punk rock, when that subsides, it maybe disappears and it turns into another kind of place. Or burns down suspiciously, or the business closes. There's lots of different reasons why some of these venues close over the years, even up until today. But, this is what happened in Vancouver is interesting because when I do talks about some of the books I've written in other places in Edmonton or Calgary or, Western Canada, people always say to me, no one's really doing what you're doing here in town. And I don't know why that is. And I usually sort of tell people, well, it's because your city hasn't changed so radically.
You're talking about no one's writing about those scenes.
No, not necessarily because and if they do, I'm not aware of them, or if they do, they're in a different way. But the idea is that a lot of city, what happened in Vancouver, and let's say since everybody uses the benchmark of Expo '86, but it really sort of started to change more once you got into the '90s, especially downtown, and even more so, it's the last 20 years. So you've been here for 15 of them. You've seen it. You've seen how.
I feel like I've been through a complete change.
Yeah, and it has been. I'm old enough.
Even our hockey team changed.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Seriously, they changed the year I moved here. They completely changed.
So a lot of the changes that have happened in Vancouver, it takes maybe 50 years, 60 years for those changes to happen in another city. For here, it's been like in the last 20, 25 years.
Do you think the Olympics did that? Well, Expo did it.
Expo did it. The Olympics sort of added to it. We were well on our way then.
Yeah.
But I remember, I'm born 1971, so I remember what the city used to look like and smell like. There were areas of town that smell totally different now. I remember the old breweries that were out by Arbutus and Broadway. There was a Carling O'Keefe brewery there, so anytime you went by there in the morning, it just stank of hops. It was really heavy air. That's all gone now. If you walk over the Granville Street Bridge as a kid, I remember looking down, you'd see log booms from the forestry industry that was at it. Now you wouldn't see that. There's $1 million condos on those shores.
Was Bruno Garussi on any of the logs?
It did Relic from Beachcombers.
That's right.
It could have been. That whole Beachcombers thing felt very. That was the industry out here. So
Danger Bay.
Yeah, all that stuff. It was much more. It was very maritime. It still is, but it's the urbanism of Vancouver has grown so much, and the city's changed so much that those changes were a little bit bound to happen. And some of those changes, when you really start looking at some things, the west end of Vancouver is a very famous area because of all the apartment buildings and the density down there. That changed in the 1960s. So, the downtown was changing even then. And anyway, so some people, it's a big topic of conversation here in town. What was the best time to be alive in Vancouver? And it's inevitably it's their own youth is what they nostalgically look back at. But with all those changes, they're changed in the nightclub and the venue scene. In the 1960s and through the 70s, Hornby Street, which is now, if you go down to Hornby Street, there's High Steakhouse there and some bank towers. But that used to be where all the clubs were. The Cave was there, Misty's, 12 Caesars, the Living Room, the Body Shop, all these old nightclubs that used to be around that used to have bands come through it. And that changed. Real estate started to change that. So the nightclub starts to shift. Not long after that, the rise of Gastown neighborhood happens.
Define Gastown for is it a town full of gas?
I should.
You got a steam clock.
This famous steam clock. If you come to Vancouver and you hear about Gastown's sort of where the city, quote unquote, began. And it's the funny thing is, it's old, but it's only so old because the way it was created with the brick streets, and that was all in the 1970s. It wasn't like that. It hasn't been this preserved Edwardian corner of the. That's a little bit for the tourists. There's an alleyway there called Blood Alley, and people think, why, was there butcher shops there? Or somebody killed? No, they just, the architect that was supervising the renovation of Gastown just thought it'd be a great name for so we have sometimes, Vancouver's a very young city, in that sense. So as I say, the changes that have happened in Vancouver have happened before your very eyes. So, and that's what makes it kind of unique, but with all those changes, as the city's grown, you've also seen big changes in the music industry. So it's been a complete shift. So there's very few clubs as we're talking about, Commodore Ballroom being one. The Vogue is still, but the Vogue didn't used to always have bands. It was kind of like a place where Stomp, would happen, or the sort of musical productions and things like that. It's only more in recent years that's become a show. There's new clubs that have arisen, and new venues like the Rickshaw Theater and the Imperial and some places like that. The Biltmore's still around, even though the Biltmore was a biker bar in the 70s. But it's been interesting to watch, and some people ask me, is the great era of live music over? Is rock and roll dead now? And with all these clubs gone, and I don't think so. I think that there's always ebbs and flows of these things, and I think there's what I've found interesting is in some of the stuff that's happening in town is actually happening in places. Some of these places off the map. There's a place called 333 Clark, which is called 333, but it just shut down. As another example because it was in an old sort of mechanics building, but they were doing like hardcore shows in there. There's a place just up the road from us here called the Clubhouse. That's done. It's in this warehouse, and I walked in there and it was packed, and I couldn't believe God, there's all these millennials watching live music. I almost
on their phone.
Yeah, no, they were actually watching. They were taking some pictures, but they were actually there and watching it and present, and a tear almost came to my eye, thinking like this is exactly.
Well, they were judging music,
but it was cool to see. So some of it's kind of receded underground, which maybe is good for it. That it goes underground a little bit again, so then it comes back with a vengeance. You go.
I mean, this is book number 4.
Yes.
Right. So, walk me through the process. So you start with the Penthouse, correct?
Started with the book on the Penthouse nightclub called Liquor, Lust, and the Law in 2012. That came out.
Is this a you idea, or is this based on your local knowledge of the city? Arsenal comes to you and says, "Hey, do you want to do this?"
That was a weird thing. I was writing on the side. I kind of enjoyed writing. On tour, I would sometimes like write an article and email it back to Vancouver to maybe somebody who might run it in a whether it was in a.
And when you were on tour, they didn't have email, so that was a whole.
It was a whole other thing. It was tricky to do, and I had written an article for the Vancouver Courier about the Penthouse, and the Penthouse is a sort of notorious place that goes back decades in Vancouver, and it has this really wild history going back to the 30s and 40s. But famously there was a murder next door there in 1983 of Joe Filipponi, who was the patriarch of the Filipponi family and started the Penthouse, who got
hence the Soprano tag.
So it's hence the Soprano tag, and that murder has always been sort of a long shadow cast over the family, but I didn't get into that. I got into it in an article, but I didn't start with it, and I got into other things that I thought were quite frankly more interesting. And Danny Filipponi, who's the nephew of Joe Filipponi and the son of Ross Filipponi, who runs that place now, really liked it and thought it was really well written and also sort of showcased the history of that place in a really fair way, because I thought some of the things that had been said about the place, and it wasn't really true, it was just the sort of, the truth is actually even better than some of the made up stuff or the rumors that people have. So I wrote that book and it came out in 2012. I guess I signed on to do it at the end of 2011, and it was a huge success, here in town, and got nominated for BC Book Prize, and it was great. So I suddenly was sort of showing up. I used to get recognized at record stores, but now I get recognized at bookstores.
There it is.
And it was kind of like this whole other angle that was suddenly kind of opened up for me. So after that, I thought, I'm going to do, some of this was easy stuff to me because I thought no one has ever written a book about the Penthouse before. This seems, I'm going to do a book about the Commodore. Nobody's written a book about that, and I was probably well placed to do that with some of the relationships I had with some of the people that ran it. And that did just as well, so sometimes the book writing thing, I think, is like maybe the movie industry. If you have a success, they'll let you do it again, but if you have a flop,
it's over.
Maybe it's over,
why do they keep letting our band?
Yeah. So in the wake of that, I thought I wanted to mix it up, and there was this true crime story, which I had always been fascinated by. And I had written an article about that too, that was sort of a dress rehearsal for the book, and that was a book that eventually became called The Last Gang in Town. And it's a true story about East Vancouver street gangs in the 1970s and what the Vancouver Police Department did to combat them in a secret gang squad that they put together to aggressively, which, in quotes, beat up some of these gangs.
That was a tough book for you to research.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Right? There was
and I got some calls from people that wanted to know why I was poking around into this, or there were some concerns from the let's say the lads that ride motorcycles for a living and have the things the things emblazoned on the back of their leather jackets, and but I managed to sort of negotiate my way through that. And it was, the funny thing was, in the wake of that book coming out, I heard from all these old retired police officers that say, "Hey, everybody got the book for Christmas and everybody really liked it." And then I also heard from some of the bikers that everybody got the book for Christmas. They all liked it.
Those are the Shriners?
The Shriners. Yes, they are the Shriners. Yes, that'd be safe to say who they are. But I think, it sort of, I didn't pick sides, and I tried to illustrate that life was just different back then for both sides of the law. And it struck a chord with people because I think people had heard about those gangs, like the Clark Park Gang and some of the ones I name in the book, that but had never read anything concrete about them or wanted to know fact from fiction. And that sort of ended up being it. So that was a real bonus too. So I thought it had been an idea for me for a while to do a book maybe on the clubs in town. You know, the Penthouse is still around and the Commodore is still around. What about tackling something about the clubs that are no longer here and why they are gone? Because if you talk to people in Vancouver, everybody remembers a place they used to go to that's gone now because the city has changed so much, along with the music industry. And every generation talks about, while your grandparents might talk about here in town, if they lived here, grew up here a little bit, they might talk about these old places like the Cave and Izzy's and Oil Can Harry's, all these old great names for clubs they used to have. Whereas the grandchildren might remember Love Affair or Gracelands or the Town Pump or Richards on Richards that they went to. So it's a funny thing. There's almost a thread through everybody who's lived here who remembers a fun night spot they went to that's gone now, either because there's a condo development there now and the city and that whole block has changed, or, you know, for one reason or another. Sometimes actually some of the places are still around. Well, I'm
every town is going to have that.
For sure.
It just seemed to really, I mean, we touched on it a bit earlier, but it just seemed to really expedite here.
It sure did.
You know, and
exactly like you say. I mean,
because the Horseshoe's still in Toronto, Lee's is still in Toronto.
Yeah.
I think
even the El
Rivoli,
Macombo is still in Toronto, and that's been
Rivoli,
shuttered for years, and it's just been sort of mothballed, waiting to come back any day now. You know, New York lost CBGB's. There's clubs in Los Angeles, the big towns that no longer have that place that everybody talked about in this sort of these mythical places where these bands came through. And that's what makes the Commodore, you know, so interesting, or even the Penthouse, because there's so many people showbiz people that went in there just to hang out, you know, like. And when we lose those places, it's not so much that the stars went there. It's where we as people in the city went to, and that's where we met, and that's where there's very few places in Vancouver that are cross-generational places where your grandparents went to, your parents went to, and you could go to. You can count them on one hand: Stanley Park, the P&E, the Orpheum, the Commodore. Even the Penthouse in a weird way, you know. But after that, I challenge you to sort of starts dropping off. You know, it's really hard to sort of think of, you know.
I mean, is there anything in the burbs? I mean, I live in the burbs.
Yeah.
I mean, the last time I saw you play a gig out there was at the Dublin.
Yeah, exactly. There's new places there because
Cheers,
those places have really changed. You know, that
the burbs, there's nothing.
The suburbs have really changed. I mean,
in Oshawa, in Ontario, we had the Moon Room in Oshawa, which you might have played, the Eclipse.
Yeah.
Peterborough.
Is Barrymore still there in Ottawa? Has it changed? I think it has.
I believe it is still there. We'll have to call our friend Eric Hoffman. There
Have to ask.
What's going on there? And then there's the
and Zaphod's gone. Yeah.
What else is up there? There was there was a couple in Peterborough, but that scene through Southern Ontario was.
It's fun when I talk to people like yourself who remember, whether they're people who are still in touring bands, used to be, were in bands before, now they're in production, or we're all in that network.
Yeah.
There's this thing that we all fought in the Crusades. We all went off and did this thing because, you know, we're familiar with those rooms. We came up a little bit on tour. You know, I know some people now who are especially maybe talent buyers who aren't people that necessarily grew up on the road like we did. They come from different booking backgrounds. Maybe they were a college booker or something like this, and which is a little bit different. But when you went through all those places and you know those rooms, there's a kind of a knowing glint when you meet somebody like that and say,
you went to the zoo in Winnipeg.
Yeah, the zoo in Winnipeg. Oh my gosh.
Can't load in until the 2:15 features off the stage. So it's like,
the zoo.
Man, but then you get the spaghetti.
Yeah. Oh God. And all the pictures on the wall. So see, immediately it's like if we had never met one another and immediately start talking about that, we would feel we had gone through the war together. You know, like, and there's some of those places are gone. I know a little bit nostalgic for that. It doesn't mean that it's any better or any worse today on that front because there's different avenues, but it's a fun thing to talk about it.
Do you think that Vancouver After Dark opens up the possibility of you doing Canada After Dark?
Perhaps so.
You know, which is where you can, if no one's doing it in those markets, then you should go do it. Right?
Perhaps so.
I mean, you've been in all those markets. You can call up. You could probably spend 2 weeks with Hugh Dillon in Ontario and just go to all of his favorite places. And
he would be a good source.
That's a book.
Oh my God, there's in Dave Bedini's book A Cold Road, he talks about at the townhouse in Sudbury, that the Headstones had come through and had written what was ostensibly the Sistine Chapel of filth that they had done in Sharpie. They must have had teams of guys doing this over hours because it was a massive, massive drawing that they did. And it literally could have taken them a week. I have no idea how they pulled it off. And when I read that, I had come through with the Mackenzies maybe a week later from them doing that. And we all saw it and kind of our jaws dropped. So if any of the boys from the Headstones listen to this, I hope you're laughing because many bands in Canada saw your artwork, which was very rude. I don't want to say what it was, but it's funny how so many people saw that. And it's interesting. It'll be an interesting concept to talk about, because some of those clubs along the way,
probably shouldn't say it because you probably get fired from something. Somebody will fire you.
Somebody will get angry.
That's a different.
It's actually better not to say because the mysteriousness of it is.
That's right.
Even better.
You just have to. That should be.
If you would see it now, it'd be like
they have those shows called Ghost Stories. You go in and you got to find a ghost in a town. Go find all the Headstones artwork around.
Oh my
God!
They must have had a team of. I don't know how many Sharpies they went through to draw that.
The funny thing is that band. It's the first show I ever did with my own money.
Really?
As a promoter.
Wow.
Brought them into a 200 capacity club. They were great. The agent at the time was awesome. I think it was a cooperation between Rob Patty, Jeff Crape, and from Feldman and Sam Tuma at the time.
Right.
And we did, they were like it was kind of like there was a tour going on, and Sam pushed the agenda to get the band in there. My band had opened up. Dale from the band had played on my band's first record.
Oh wow.
First of 12 that we put out.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where
that's good.
Dale was really great to me over that time. And that all came out of the Moon Room in Oshawa, and that sort of thing. And metal name, Carrie King.
Yeah.
At the time, she her name was Carrie Nowensky. She was like running the place there. Had the Eclipse.
Wow.
She used to bring the Headstones in all the time.
The Eclipse, yes, I remember the Eclipse.
Right, and there was all this stuff. So my first show that I did with my own money was the Headstones in the great town of Port Perry, Ontario.
Wow.
And we did it at a place called Trader Sam's, and the gig got shut down with 2 songs left in their set because somebody sprayed pepper spray.
Oh my God.
In the gig, and I think if you ask Hugh about it, he'd be like, "Did you play a gig in Port Perry?" And we had to get off the stage, and it was crazy. And so
he would remember. He's got a great memory for these things.
It was an interesting time, and all those guys were great.
They were, and to
me at the beginning of my career,
because they have a new record out.
Yeah, they do,
and it sounds amazing. And I got to say, and I've said this before, one of the best bands I've seen lately is the Headstones.
And you've done all their stuff,
and I've done a bunch of their shows with the Commodore and stuff like that. And like most improved. Not that they weren't bad before, but they're so much tighter. They're so much more focused. They're better players, and Hugh's always been good, but he's like a man on fire there. Now, I tell people, listen, do yourself a favor and go see you will not be disappointed. I know people said, Headstones, really? From back, they're a totally different band now. They're way heavier. It's great. They're tight, and I was stunned, the last couple times they're down. They're so good. I shouldn't be stunned because now I know what to expect.
Did Hugh contribute to this book?
He did.
Who else do you have?
Hugh and Trent Carr from the Headstones talk about coming out to Vancouver to play the Town Pump in the book. Tommy Chong talks about early Vancouver in the 1960s, playing in the clubs and managing some of the clubs that him and his brother were involved with. Tommy Chong was actually a really central figure in the Vancouver music scene in the 1960s. Everybody knows him from his comedy, stuff with Cheech and Chong, but he was a real central, massive figure because not only was he playing all the time in his own band that he had, but he was managing some of these clubs and giving work to other musicians in town. So he was a great interview. I really enjoyed talking with him in particular. Yeah.
Your favorite gig that you've seen, and you just touched on Headstones, but let's talk your favorite gig that you've seen in a venue that's no longer here.
Oh my gosh.
In Vancouver.
Oh my gosh, there's so many now.
And there's probably a list of the ones you can talk about, and the ones of the list that you can't talk about.
Well, God, let me think now.
Because this scene was thriving.
Yeah. And I think, it still is. People say, oh, Vancouver, no fun city. I totally disagree with that. And that may come as a shock to people, but let me tell you, I look at stuff or I get invites to go see a band or come see a show. There's often 2 or 3 a night, every night of the week. And if I went out to every one of those, I'd need a new liver by the end of the month. there's always new stuff going on. Sometimes it's hit and miss, but there's always stuff to check out, and there's so much other kinds of entertainment with some of the theater stuff and God, everything. There's so much stuff that you can do here in town, like that. I honestly don't think that you just have to be sort of a little bit more open, and you sometimes have to check out stuff that's not in the club that you expect to go to. It's somewhere else. It's somewhere, and maybe Vancouver's always been a little bit insular that way. I always when people tell me, "Oh, I came to Vancouver. I didn't like it. I didn't meet anybody. Everybody was really cold, and I didn't have a good time." And I always ask, "Well, where the hell did you go? Like who? Tell me where you went that you had a And it's inevitably they went to the worst place. God, and they went some other town. Like, what? You went out there? Why the hell? And it's like, next time you come to town, give me a call. I'll tow you around.
I went to Saanich.
Yeah. So I honestly disagree. It's never been. Of course, there's clubs that have disappeared. Of course, it's never been harder to start a bar. One of the things that's interesting that's in the book is some of the great clubs that were happening in the 1970s were started by guys who were 23 and 25 that managed to get a little bit of money together to open up a place. Those maybe real pioneering days are maybe sadly gone because the city is much more developed. It's a lot. It's tighter margins and you need a lot more money to start some places, but I don't think it's over. I don't think it's changing. One of the things I often hear from people is, there's some musicians that were around the 1960s playing in Vancouver say, best ever. That was the greatest time, and everything. People always have an attitude that their own glory years were the greatest time to be alive. It's something we naturally do. We reason our own youth this way, that the generation before us never had it as good as we did, and the generation after totally missed out. So everything after when they were probably roughly in their 20s to 30s, that zone.
Old maybe man on the porch.
Yeah. After that, no, everything sucks. And you could talk to people, and I talk to people, and people who say in the 1960s era, you could go down to people when the scene switches down. Let's say someplace like the Smiling Buddha, they say, "Oh man, that was such a great time." The 80s, a bunch of other clubs start to open, and a new wave of music starts happening. Even in the 90s, there's always something interesting happening, and inevitably there's some 22-year-old kid who's going out with his guitar to play with his buddies tonight at some hole in the wall, and 20 years later he's going to talk about that was the greatest time to be alive in Vancouver. So it's a bouncing ball that moves that way. Some of the best shows I've seen that are in clubs that are gone now, God.
If there's one in particular, I didn't have the luxury of adding the town pump to my
well, the
list,
pump is one that is near and dear to me because it was probably
I never made it there.
It was one of the great places, and part of that was, I get why people say certain other places in town were really special, but for me and my era of rock and roll people, and many other people will agree to this, that the town pump really was a special place because it was actually not a great place to watch a band. The bands played up against a wall. It wasn't in the, from left to right in the room rather than sort of front to back. It was always a strange, but somehow it worked. And it was a great era for bands coming through. When you just look at some of the listings of the newspaper, and you see night after night, oh my God, look who played. Look who was on the road then, playing in the small 500 person or less club, There were just so much good. So it was a fun room to play. I started playing, first show I ever played there was 1993 with the Real Mackenzies. I remember those shows very, very well. And they were always great. They were always totally off the chain, fun shows and packed rooms, But there was also something really special about the front room and this is something I've written about, that there was a lounge in the front of the town pump that if you kind of wanted to take a break from the band or whatever, you could kind of step back into the bar and kind of go down into this sort of front section of the room that was right by the front door. And there must have been only maybe 9 tables there or something. There was not a big, but I met everybody there. It was like that scene in Goodfellas.
Went down.
It was like that scene in Goodfellas where Henry walks in, he says, I met Fat Louie and Fat Andy and Jimmy 2 times. Honestly, coming in there was that to me because I met Biff Naked there. I met Matthew Good there, Dave Gann, almost everybody, that was sort of the world kind of opened up to me. And I was 22, 23. And that was a great thing. It felt like within a week, I was picking up my mail there. I was there so much. And that in itself was a great sort of little conference room because you saw the guys in the ska bands talking to the folk people. you saw the metal people talking to the blues guys.
Right.
And it was a real mix of different genres of people doing, different stuff in town. And that's that's what I miss.
With his arms crossed, looking over everyone.
Yeah.
As the governor.
Yeah.
Right? With 5440. I mean, they even named a band of an album after.
Oh my God! After Smiling Buddha.
Smiling Buddha Cabaret.
So for sure. That was
great times.
That was a real fun era. And I know a lot of people who miss that. Not necessarily because the music was better, but just the social aspect of it in particular, especially for the cadre musicians in town. Everybody was very welcoming. And the fun thing was that I miss a little bit from today is you don't see some of those multi-genre bills. Now if it's going to be a bill of music, it's like 3 metal bands or 3 rock bands or 3 blues bands, or I don't know. But they used to take a little more chances, or people used to be a little more open. There'd be a ska band opening for like a Celtic rock band, and then somebody else would a metal band would finish, and that kind of openness and experimentation, we seem to. I don't know why that's sort of. You think it would continue, but we've become a little bit more specific in our listing, probably because of the internet. We could find exactly what we want.
Like amazing podcasts.
There's amazing podcasts like the Brenton on Tour.
There's all these great things going on.
Yeah.
But there's loads of ways that people can get their content now.
Exactly. Oh my
gosh.
They
really got to fight for entertainment. So I'm always encouraged when there's a show, and it's packed. And I always love it when I hear of a show selling out.
Yeah.
Just because it definitely people are still getting out to see it.
They do.
Even though there's not potentially a lot of historic venues left in the city, perhaps people are getting a chance to create
create
some
scene. New ones.
And that's only going to happen. That's only going to happen when they go out.
For sure. So
Vancouver After Dark is the book.
It is in stores everywhere.
This is the fourth of the
book.
The Aaron Chapman series here. Obviously, it's been good to you as we overlook the city in your beautiful penthouse. I noticed that you kept the dogs.
The prized Alsatians in the corner. Yeah,
in the other room, and you've got one of those new quiet pools.
Yes, it's very quiet.
So we couldn't. It wouldn't interfere.
It's a sink in the next room.
That's
there.
Right. But obviously, I couldn't be happier for you.
Thank you, sir. It's been a fun.
Just as your friend, I love hearing the stories because you are my historian.
Oh,
from a
that's very
personal
kind of you.
standpoint.
That's very kind of you.
It's
been fun. It's been really rewarding to I remember, as I say, being born and raised here. Some of my memories over the decades, dare I say, are kind of feed into some of the work, and it's fun to also spotlight some people I know that really haven't don't get the credit they deserve in a chapter in the book called about the Pig and Whistle, which was a real sort of rundown little bar right next to the Cruel Elephant / Hungry Eye on Cordova Street. It's gone now. That was a little crucible of stuff happening, and some of the people that were playing there, John Collins from the New Pornographers used to go down there after school just to watch my friend Robert Ford's band, and Robert passed last year, and that chapter is a real kind of tribute to him because he influenced a lot of people that went on to other stuff and was a great musician himself. So,
where can people find all the goods on Aaron
They can
Chapman?
get it certainly on any bookstore, any chapters, Indigo, Kohl's, all the big bookstores across Canada have it. If they don't have it in, they can order it in for you. You can get it on Amazon.
Pitchforks.
You can get it. It's certainly present. You'll find it in a lot of bookstores here in British Columbia, but you can get it online on Amazon or direct from the publisher, Arsenal Pulp Press, and get it straight from them. And you even get a signed copy if you want.
Well, you'll even sign it.
I'll even sign it. Just let them know that you want me to sign it to.
Are you doing robe Polaroids inside the
anything kinky is going to cost you more, folks.
That's not even kinky. This is just the John Cleese you got going on. You're living in this fancy apartment you got here. It's like I'm surprised I didn't have to put a robe on to enter.
Yeah, we should have done it in the steam room, really, and then you could hear us pouring water on the rocks and the sizzling of the sauna going around. That would have been good.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for appearing in episode 3, dude.
I am honored.
I got some coffee products for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And good luck with this. I find this and what you're doing really intriguing, and that you're by some of your own travels, you're able to sort of tell your own stories and find out your own answers to some questions. I think it's pretty cool.
It's been a blast putting together, man.
Yeah.
And, it's people like yourself coming on and telling stories, and with our paths cross every a couple times a year, and there's always something new to tell. I mean, generally by the time,
and new stuff is coming up because you've got this idea. I guess I'm going to want to let the cat out of the bag, but there's going to be, you've maybe talked about it already, of getting a bunch of us together for something.
Yeah, we're going to do a bit of a Vancouver roundtable where we're going to dive a little bit more into what we were talking about tonight. But I got some decent sized guests to the mix here that we'll be able to add.
That's a rat pack of people you've got to. I'm excited for that one.
It's going to be good, and we're going to film it on the hi-fi there.
Beautiful.
And we're gonna put it on the internet,
right on the Calatini,
right there, and it'll air right after the Beachcombers on your local station.
We'll go to Molly's Reach afterwards.
Molly's Reach. Well, maybe we'll get a chance to drive Nikki Sixx around in a couple of months. Maybe when they're in town.
Maybe back through that. I sent him a note on Instagram, and he acknowledged it there, and I just said, "Hey man, great pictures. If you're gonna come back in town again, let's do it again." So,
we know
check
guys.
out his stuff. You might.
We know some guys.
We know some guys. We'll take them around.
We'll do
had
all
fun
that.
last time.
So, thanks everyone. Check out Aaron Chapman's work, Vancouver After Dark, the Commodore Ballroom. What else we got? We got the Last Gang.
Last Gang in Town and Liquor Less Than Law. You can find me at aaronchapman.net or on Twitter, the Aaron Chapman.
And at the Penthouse.
And at the Penthouse on most nights.
At most nights. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Until next time.
If you want more music talk, get it with me, Todd Hancock, and the Toddcast podcast. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. And over the last couple of months, we've had some incredible guests, including Cancer Bats drummer Mike Peters, Big Rex singer Ian Thornley joined us. We even went out to Nickelback singer Chad Kroeger's home studio to record a little something.
When James went into one, he put the third verse where the first verse was supposed to go. And I'm like, he is human.
There's Nickelback singer Chad Kroeger talking about how Metallica was his first concert. The Brenton on Tour Music Cast is brought to you by the Toddcast podcast. Follow us at Toddcast Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can hear all the podcasts, full interviews, and a lot more through toddhancock.ca. We'll see you soon.